I'm Jack Doolittle. I'm an economics and philosophy major at the University of Delaware. My faculty mentor for this was Dr. Hans Holter. My presentation is Welfare State Models and Egalitarianism, an economic and philosophical analysis. In this, I kind of looked at some of the philosophical opposition to inequality, as well as looking at it from an economic perspective, using statistical methods to compare different kinds of welfare state models to see what is best at reducing inequality and poverty. And to do that, I kind of relied on the trichotomy introduced by Danish sociologist Esting Andersen, which divides into three categories: social democratic, continental conservative, and liberal market, which we'll go more into later. So for a background first, I have this chart, which is the average level of income inequality from 2000 to 2021 in select nations measured by the Gini coefficient, where the Gini coefficient is a measure of inequality where 0 represents perfect equality, where everyone has the same income, and 1 would be perfect inequality, where one person had all the income. As we can see, the US stands out for its high inequality relative to its peers, the value of 0.38. The closest one is the United Kingdom with a value of 0.303. And the country with the lowest level of inequality here is Denmark with 0.242. Next, we have overall and relative child poverty rates from 2000 to 2021. And relative just means the poverty rate was taken at 50% of the median income of the country. So the United States, once again, stands out for its high poverty here. The overall poverty rate is 16.6, and the child poverty rate is 19.9, nearly 20%. The country that comes closest is once again the United Kingdom, with an overall rate of 8.97 and a child poverty rate of 10.8. So the US doubles its closest peer. And the country with the lowest is Denmark, with an overall rate of 6.49 and a child poverty of 4.14. So just to put in perspective, kind of staggering poverty and inequality in the US. Next, we have income inequality measured by the Gini coefficient in the US over time. As we can see, from the 1980s, it's been steadily increasing. This is just kind of see, we already have inequality that's greater than other nations, and it's a problem which is only getting worse. So this leaves us with the question, why does inequality matter? And the first reason is that it violates ethical norms surrounding equality of opportunity and personal responsibility. Inequalities in income are largely generated through unchosen advantages and disadvantages people have between one another, right? Natural ability that comes through a natural lottery at birth, or from one's environment with intelligence and athletic ability, or it can come from other factors such as differential rates of time preference or risk propensity. And the second one is the idea of democratic community, that we are equals in the decision-making process, and persons need to be guaranteed a basic minimum to be able to do that and deliberate with each other, right? Basic level of housing, basic level of healthcare, basic level of resources, and that there should be a certain maximum where people can put onto each other undue economic coercion in the deliberative process to get what they want, right? We see this with ideas of capital flight in countries. So the objective here is to see what is the best set of institutions for achieving a society of low inequality and poverty. And we have three institutional structures. The first is social democratic, which tends to be marked by its use of universalism in its policy. There tends to be flat rate benefits that everyone receives. If you meet some certain characteristic, they tend to be rather generous. They also rely heavily on the public sector. This includes countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. And then we have the continental conservative countries, which tend to have a higher level of social stratification in their policy structure, where the amount you receive is based on your kind of employment position in society, where how it tends to work is higher earners tend to receive higher pensions or higher unemployment benefits. And these are kind of left over from the old kind of monarchical regimes on the continent. And this includes Germany, France, Austria, Belgium. And lastly, we have liberal market regimes, where they tend to rely on means-tested programs where the policy is targeted and the benefits are targeted at the poor, and they tend to rely much more on the private sector for their benefits with their social insurance programs. So, to give some preliminary results on the data and kind of go over where I collected the data, I collected primarily from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the Luxembourg Income Study. From the Luxembourg Income Study, I got disposable income Gini, market Gini, overall poverty rates, and child poverty rates. And from the OECD, I got inflation, education, trade openness, which is just imports plus exports as a percentage of GDP, and level of social spending, which is public plus private social spending as a percentage of GDP. And lastly, I had country classification, which how I did that, I looked at how different authors kind of in the comparative literature classified countries and did it according to what the consensus largely was. And kind of a brief overview is that social democratic countries had a mean Gini of 0.26, mean overall poverty of 7.76%, a mean child poverty of 6.32%. Continental conservatives had a mean Gini of 0.28%, a mean poverty of 9.01%, mean child poverty of 10.41%. And lastly, liberal markets had values of 0.33, 12.6%, and 14.54% respectively. So immediately the social democratic countries can come out on top, continental conservative ones are in the middle, and the liberal markets are last. And one interesting note is that the social democratic countries tend to be the only ones with lower child poverty rates than their overall poverty rates. So for our methodology, first for the economic model, I kind of have a primitive model where it says inequality and poverty are a function of a society's welfare state type, its level of social spending, its level of inflation, its level of education, those between 25 and I think 64 who have some tertiary education, that is college, and trade openness, as discussed earlier. Then for our economic model, we're using a multivariate linear regression analysis to estimate the coefficients, where the coefficients, the beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, and so on, represent the unit change effect on the Gini and poverty rates. So if we take inflation, for example, beta 5, if inflation were going to go from 0 to 1%, that beta 5 would represent that the change on inequality and poverty. So for the results, one thing I forgot to mention on here is the terms we're paying special attention to are the SOC-X spend and CON-X spend. That is an interaction term between the welfare state type and the level of social spending. This is so we can see the differing effects of a unit increase in spending on the different types of welfare states. Right, so beta 1 will represent, say, if spending went from 30 to 31%, the effect of it in social democratic countries on the Gini. So for our results, so the first column is the first results I ran, but I found heteroscedasticity was present, which is when you have the variance of the residuals between the actual and the estimate isn't constant. So we have to do some correcting for that, which is the second column which we're going to care about. So I found that the SOC-X spend and CON-X spend were both statistically significant at the 1% level, and SOC-X spend, and this is relative to the liberal market ones, was found to estimated to reduce inequality by negative 0.00117, and continental conservatives were estimated to reduce it by negative 0.00130, once again relative to the liberal market for each additional unit of social spending. And then we have this, which is for, I substituted in liberal market for continental conservative, so we can see if the social democratic one is statistically significant relative to the continental conservative. And initially, I found it wasn't, but one interesting thing that comes up is when you remove the market Gini as a variable, it becomes statistically significant at the 1% level with an estimated decrease of negative 0.000738. And part of my reasoning why I think this is that there's a high level of collinearity between welfare state type and their initial market and a market Gini, which makes it hard to disaggregate the effects of the two. And then here we have it for poverty and child poverty, returning to our CON-X spend and SOC-X spend. For both, they're both found to be statistically significant at the 1% level, and they were both found to reduce inequality relative to the liberal market. And I ran the analysis again, but this time, once again, substituting in liberal market for the continental conservative one, to see if social democratic was statistically significant relative to the continental conservative ones. And I found that for both, it was statistically significant at the 1% level. And it was found to reduce, the interesting one was child poverty again. The social democratic one is the best at reducing child poverty, reduced at negative 0.153% for each additional unit of social spending. So they're kind of powerhouses when it comes to reducing child poverty. And lastly, conclusions. Our findings are that the social democratic and continental conservative regimes were superior with regards to reducing inequality and poverty relative to liberal market regimes. And there was a mixed picture between social democratic and continental conservative countries for reducing inequality. And social democratic countries beat out continental conservative ones when it comes to poverty. So for future research, one thing I considered doing is constructing a theoretical model on how inequality is generated, where we'll take account of on choosing differences between persons and their natural ability by giving them different production functions and having a representative agent optimized given their production function. And then I could do deep research into comparing the social democratic countries with the continental conservative countries, since it was a little inconclusive in that regards. And lastly, I could repeat this research to control for more variables such as unemployment and growth, and introduce functional forms where it seems fitting. And that's it. Any questions? Yeah?
Could you provide some examples of liberal market regimes?
Oh, yeah, that's like the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and Ireland. Did I skip over those ones?
Yeah.
Alright, my bad. That's the group we fall into. Any other questions? Yeah.
Does your model take into account structural policies or structural ways that the regimes might actually be contributing to inequity or inequality?
So that's what the dummy variable in the interaction term was meant to account for, where we have the SOC extent. It's coded as 1 for true if a country falls under the social democratic category, and 0 if it's liberal or conservative. And then the con extent is coded as 1 for true if it's continental conservative, 0 if it's anything else. That's how I account for it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
And all the examples, 3 examples provided cover kind of like affluent Western countries to one extent or another.